Here again, but for now, let's bring in Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator Coons, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Casey. Great to be on with you.
Can you tell us a little bit, take us behind the scenes of the negotiations that have been going on all throughout the day here on Capitol Hill, and talk us through also what you think so far the leadership reaction to those talks has been?
Well, Casey, I've been hard at work here in the Capitol all day, literally since first thing this morning, meeting with Republican and Democratic senators individually, listening to them and their concerns, folks from a very broad range of backgrounds, and then joining with the others in this group of 20. We spent several hours together sharing what we'd heard from others in our caucuses and trying to come up with a strategy that would be acceptable to both sides. Casey, in some ways, it was among the most encouraging hours I've spent in 7 years here. There are some terrific and capable senators here, but there's not a lot of trust between our caucuses, and in particular in our caucus, that President Trump won't jerk the wheel of the bus left and right again. We've been here several times. We had what seemed a very promising agreement, a bipartisan deal that Senator Graham of South Carolina and Senator Durbin of Illinois presented to the president after he asked for one, and in a famously vulgar exchange, he blew that up. Last Friday, Senator Schumer, our leader, had a long and productive one-on-one meeting with President Trump, with staff, and felt very optimistic that they'd come to an agreement about all the issues we face, about spending in community health centers and children's health insurance program, DACA and disaster relief, only to have that walked back by the White House 2 hours later. So getting our leaders to share the sort of framework that we've approached, I think would be a big step forward. I'll tell you, Casey, what I am most hoping that we will hear at some point this evening is Leader McConnell recognizing that on that list of 5 things that we need to negotiate and move forward on is DACA and Dreamers, along with border security. In his speech Friday night, in his speeches last week, he was persistently saying that there's no urgency, we don't need to address this, it's about illegal immigration, when in fact I think there is urgency to addressing all 5 of these issues. We shouldn't be doing another short-term CR if we don't have agreement about what's on that menu to negotiate and by what deadline.
Senator, you mentioned your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham. I want to show you a little bit of what he had to say in the hallways earlier today and then ask you about it on the other side. Take a look.
To my Democratic friends, don't overplay your hand. The government shutdown is not a good way to get an outcome legislatively. We learned that as Republicans. So February the 8th makes sense to me with a commitment to move to immigration.
Are Democrats overplaying their hand?
Well, we'll have to see, Casey. In some ways, that's up to the American people. What we've heard so far is that there are lots of folks who, like those of us who voted against a 30-day CR without any agreement about what we'd move forward on, who are sick and tired of short-term CRs. The Pentagon, the assistant to the Secretary of the Defense, sent out a message Friday night, no more short-term CRs. We need to address investing in defense. We tried on Friday night to move ahead a 1-day continuing resolution, a 3-day continuing resolution, so that we could keep negotiating, and those were rejected. So part of our challenge here, Casey, is that both parties have been hardening their position. I'd like us to get moving forward. I don't think it's constructive to have the government of the United States shut down. It doesn't help us domestically or overseas, but it's more important that we come to an agreement that moves us forward. We have all these unaddressed issues that have stacked up over months. It's time for us to find a framework to move forward.
You mentioned that there's a real lack of trust between the Republican conference, the Democratic caucus. What kind of commitment do you need to see from Mitch McConnell around immigration for you, for Senator Schumer, for others to be willing to say, okay, fine, we'll reopen the doors of the government?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy for Leader McConnell. How are you supposed to negotiate when you don't know what your president is ultimately going to accept or not accept? He is in a box in terms of being able to negotiate on many of these issues. How much is acceptable to the president on disaster relief? That's tough to predict. What is he ultimately going to accept in terms of a border wall or wall security or wall system? I think Leader Schumer made a very forward-leaning offer on Friday, and he rejected it. So I think ultimately what matters is whether or not Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell can come to an agreement that each trusts is a commitment that we will address all of these issues by a time certain.
Senator, could you vote for a bill that fully funded the president's border wall?
You know, I would really struggle with fully funding, if by that you mean something like $30 billion in a year.
Well, we heard that it was close to $20 billion that was put on the table at this meeting on Friday.
Part of our challenge is exactly what we're talking about. In his campaign, candidate Donald Trump talked about a concrete wall stretching from sea to shining sea, one continuous physical wall on our southern border. Now, as president, at least General Kelly's chief of staff has suggested that his actual views may have matured. And a number of the folks in our bipartisan group today were saying that the Department of Homeland Security has more nuanced and more detailed proposals about border wall systems and security. I could support robust investment in border security that would ensure that we have control over our southern border. I don't think that it's wise to build a 2,000-mile concrete wall, but I also don't think that's really what's on the table anymore. I think we're talking about significant increased investment so that we've got control of our southern border. I voted for that in the comprehensive immigration bill of 5 years ago. I'd be willing to vote for that again, but we'd have to get real clarity and finality about other immigration issues such as DACA in order for us to move ahead on something that addresses border security and the status of Dreamers.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and do keep us posted. We would be happy to have you back if there is a major breakthrough this evening.
Great. Thanks, Kasie.
Thank you.